Hello everybody and welcome to another One Piece review, this time for One Piece 1017. We got a big revelation by the end of this chapter. 2 new hybrid forms, and some juicy CP9 backstory. We start off with Buggy, who has been attaching cubes and circus balls to his limbs to grow in size, and it reminded me of the time during the 3D2Y special where he had to confront a cube man, and the cube man trapped him in a cube. The chapter opens up with Queen using his King's Hockey to yell at Tama, and of course I'm kidding, I don't really think that's King's Hockey. I mean, just the fact that Tama gets up pretty soon afterwards pretty much makes this very obviously a gag. It's kind of funny how Tama is scared of Queen, but she's not scared of Big Mom. And I like how in the first page, if you look at the bottom right corner, you can see the tower that Zoro slashed when he first arrived. We go to Frankie and Jinbe and we find that neither of them has been able to fight their opponent 1v1. Both Frankie and Jinbe seem roughed up, but what I find interesting in Frankie's case is that even though he has some blood on him, the Frankie Shogun looks clean. So it's a pretty big testament to how durable the Wapple metal is. And since Frankie and Jinbe's fights haven't been fair 1v1s, this pretty much gets them bragging rights once they actually defeat their opponents. So once Jinbe defeats Who's Who, he's going to be able to say, I'm stronger than Who's Who, and then some, because there were other people ganging up on me. And it'll be the same thing with Frankie. Like, I defeated Sasaki, but then I also had to deal with all this garbage. Now, Inuarashi versus Jack, I've said this before, but I think this is the fight where Inu is going to lose. If you look at him, he's already huffing and puffing, heavy breathing. He's already bandaged up from his fight against Kaido. He has an arrow sticking out of his back. Obviously, Jack isn't playing fair either, but if you look at his appearance, he looks a lot cleaner. Excluding some of the bandages, it just seems like he made a pretty clear recovery from his fight against the Minx. And he still hasn't gone hybrid form. We get a shot of some of the gifters, including Miss Circa, who is the girl which has been glued to a gorilla's chest. And so we see the gifters there attacking some of the pleasures and waiters that betrayed the army. Just then, however, Tama gives her announcement, and so this finally concludes her role as one of this arc's biggest, strongest plot devices. We've got ZP0 there looking kind of confused because they're going to have to update their numbers. And we get like this montage of all the gifters changing sides, like Briscola, Poker using his rattlesnake to help Jinbe out. We got the Bug Squad as well. And I like how Hamlet is kicking people to fight, because what we know about giraffe kicks is that they can be deadly. Giraffe kicks have been known to be so fast and strong sometimes that they can literally kick the head off of a lion. We get a shot of Luffy spitting out some water aboard Law's sub. So for the 0% of you that thought that Luffy was going to die, turns out that he will be saved. The most important part of that section is the Momonosuke part where he says that they were so high up, which means that they are currently no longer high up. So does that mean that he flew down to the mainland as a dragon? Is that where they are right now? And if not, then where are they?
One of the first things that I really appreciate about this chapter is that it essentially concludes the Otama Kibidango plot point. It's over, it's done, it's been addressed. We all knew it was going to happen, and so now we won't have to spend so much time on this because it's finally over. We can move on to bigger and better things. So thank you, Chapter 1017, because thanks to you, we don't have to spend any more time on this. It's like when the Capone cover story ended, you know? People were so glad that it was done. I also think this chapter did a really good job at compensating for the lack of tension by giving us some reveals. Like if you notice, the lack of tension that I've been talking about is still there. In fact, it actually kind of increases because the gifters are now on the side of the Alliance. But I think in this chapter, Oda does a really good job at saying, yes, I know there's a lack of tension, so I'm going to give you some reveals. I'm going to give you 2 hybrid forms, and I'm going to give you some character background info on Who's Who. And a little bit of Queen background as well.
Queen charges up a beam to hit Tama with it. Usopp notices it coming with observation haki and tells the girls to move, and then we hear Diabra Jumba Collier Striker!
The beam blows up inside of Queen's mouth, and again I'm not seeing any blood, like with Marco's Phoenix brand attack, or like with Chopper's Monster Point attack, which also drew blood, but I think the difference here with Sanji is that this makes Queen go into hybrid form. So I guess it just comes down to what you think is more impressive, drawing blood from your opponent, or forcing them to go into their strongest form. Granted, Marco was fighting 2 commanders at the same time, so I definitely don't want to downplay that. It's just a cool thing that no raid suit Sanji is able to force Queen to go hybrid.
Turns out Queen was part of a research group called MADS, or Mad Scientists. I don't know, I think that's what it stands for, Mad Scientists. And I'm assuming that the people in that group included Caesar, Vegapunk, Judge, and Queen himself. The word also reminds me of SAD, or SAD, which is a substance that Caesar created based on the research of Judge and Vegapunk to be able to create the artificial devil fruits. The connection also explains why Queen knew that the numbers were failed experiments, failed replicas of the ancient giants from Punk Hazard, and then obviously Sanji still has a problem with his dad, which explains why he's been resistant to putting on the raid suit, in this fight. But I think Hybrid Form Queen will be the one to change that. I think Hybrid Form Queen will actually force Sanji to make the decision of putting on the raid suit. I like Queen's Doc Ock design. I think it goes very well with the theme of the fight. So it'll be the giant mechanical monster versus the superhero from Germa 66. I never expected that his hair would also be mechanical. And so I'm kind of glad that he only has 3 claws, because if he had 4, that would just make him way too similar to Dr. Octopus. But then also Sanji is associated with the number 3. So San 3, Sanji is the 3rd son of the Vince Milk family. So Queen gets to have 3 claws. And I kind of wonder if Queen could put the blade in one of those claws and kind of fight long distance, kind of like a scorpion kind of a thing, just trying to jab Sanji. I also wonder, can the claws spin and be used as weapons that way?
We go to Miyagi, Tristan, and Chopper, and just the way that Tristan is holding Chopper really reminds me of Fishman Island. Just the way Robin was holding Chopper back then after he had used Monster Point, because we know that one of the side effects of Chopper using Monster Point is that he's unable to walk for a couple of hours, and so now thanks to Caesar's 30-minute boost, we get to see him have brand new side effects. Now, this was a gag that I thought was very funny, but I also think it's done for marketing purposes. I think this is also a ploy, kind of a way of getting people to buy more Chopper merchandise.
I just get the impression that the marketing team went to Oda and they were like, hey Oda sensei, we're trying to up the numbers, up the sales on the Chopper plushies. Can you help us with a brand new design? And then Oda was like, fine, I'll make him cuter by making him smaller. Is the size of a fetus okay? Yes, that's perfect. And then we're also trying to work on a plushie that talks when you press its belly. So can you give him some weird, wacky, old man phrases? And then Oda's like, okay, yeah, sure, fine, whatever. So Chopper's phrase in this chapter is, I'll be fine. You just focus on yourself there, Sonny. Arigato, Oda-sensei. Oh, and don't forget to make the design Funko Pop friendly so that we can sell some of those as well.
Now, Zoro says he doesn't care about the side effects because if he doesn't get back up, the Alliance is going to end up having way more problems than that anyway. And so this is setting up another nothing happened moment for him. So Zoro's going to feel an excruciating amount of pain, and he'll probably still be feeling it after the arc is over. Now, the thing that worries me is that this could be a way of nerfing Zoro for whatever fight he has coming after this arc. So if you remember back in Thriller Bark, when he took Luffy's pain, right? That took such a toll on his body that he was still feeling it in Sabaody. Like when they were fighting the Pacifista, there's a moment where Zoro falls to the ground, and then Sanji's like, man, this guy hasn't fully recovered from the pain that he took back in Thriller Bark. So we could be getting a repetition of that where he gets nerfed in Elbaf or against Shiryu, but thankfully we still have Marco and Law in play, so hopefully they'll be able to reduce the side effect of the remedy so that it's not as extreme. We go back to Jinbe versus Who's Who and leave it to Oda to completely trick us by making us believe that the length of Who's Who's blade would actually match the length of his sheath or of his scabbard. So unless the blade extends like Sasaki's, or it turns out that the blade is actually just one part, one component of a bigger blade, it looks like Who's Who actually has a dagger instead of a sword, which actually kind of serves to justify why Zoro isn't the one fighting him, right? Because he's not technically a swordsman. And neither is Sasaki, because Sasaki has kind of like a whip thing going on with his blade. Really, the only swordsman within the Beast Pirates is technically King. It turns out Whozu is a master of Rokushiki style, and he's been able to adopt the techniques into his own fighting style and expand on the techniques to create variations. So the first one we see is based off of Shigan, which is finger pistol, except he's doing it with his blade. Jinbe counters by using Arabesque Brick Fist, which is a move he used back in Impel Down against some of the guards there. So if Whozu hadn't dodged that attack, this is probably what would have happened to him, but he moves out of the way by using Soru, and so of course we know from Water 7 that the trick to using Soru, in order to look like you're disappearing like that, the trick is to kick the air 10 times in 1 second. And so Whozu takes advantage of the altitude and uses Rankyaku to send down a kick at Jinbe, but Jinbe blocks it using armament hockey.
I think Oda was very intentional with the choreography of this fight, Because if you look at what the moves are, what actually goes down, you'll find that all 7 Rokishi techniques make some kind of an appearance, or at least all 7 techniques are referenced to some extent in this fight scene. So like I said, the first one is Shigan, or finger pistol. In this case, whose variation uses the blade, right, to send out like these piercing rounds. The second one is Soru, which is the super speed that Who's Who uses to dodge Jinbei's attack. Now, I actually made a mistake just now when I said that you needed to kick the air 10 times within 1 second. You technically just need to kick whatever surface you're on 10 times within 1 second to be able to move that way. The third one is Geppo, which is basically what we've seen Sanji do, where he kicks the air to be able to fly. And so we see Who's Who being able to do that to sort of stay above Jinbei for a little bit. And then that's followed by Rankukyu, which is the Tempest kick, right? The kick that Who's Who sends down to Jinbei. And then obviously in the official translation, Jinbei says, should I call my armament haki Tekai then? So the reference is pretty self-explanatory there. And then we see that by the end, Jinbei uses observation haki to be able to move out of the way from Who's Who's attack. And I think that's Oda's reference to Kamiye, which is basically the technique that CP9 members use to be able to move like paper and be able to be super flexible in order to be able to dodge attacks. Now before that, Who's Who says that 12 years ago, he was actually comparable to Rob Lucci, right? And I think it's very intentional that he ends up saying that right before he launches his shockwave jaw attack. Because if you remember, according to Rob Lucci, if you are able to master each of the first 6 techniques of Rokishi to their full extent, you can actually unlock the ability to use a 7th technique. And so that 7th technique is called Rokyogan. And so it's basically the shockwave that Lucci uses against Luffy to cause him internal damage. The official translation calls Rokyogan 6 King Pistol, and then the official translation for this chapter calls Who's Who's jaw attack Fang Pistol. So I'm assuming that that's kind of like Who's Who's version of Rokyogan. It's too big for it to be Shigan, or finger pistol. It's too big and it's more of a shockwave type of attack. Like the sound effect when he releases it even says boom. So yeah, those are pretty much the 7 Rokishi techniques being referenced in this chapter. I thought Who's Who's hybrid form was very fitting because it really does remind me a lot of Rob's. And he also looks like Beast. Now, I don't know what prison Who's Who was sent to 12 years ago, but I'm assuming that it wasn't Impel Down. I don't think that he was being held at Impel Down because as far as we know, like Impel Down, the only character that has been able to break out to escape Impel Down before Luffy went there was Shiki. So unless Who's Who escaped Impel Down at the same time that Luffy escaped, then he probably wasn't being kept in Impel Down.
So I went back to Luffy's flashback just to sort of refresh my memory for this review, and just watching that scene play out, like one of the things that really sticks out to me now, given what we know, is just how much Higuma, the mountain bandit, underestimates Shanks in that scene. Like, he just doesn't know what Shanks is capable in that scene, just completely oblivious to how strong he is. Because Shanks doesn't really fight unless he needs to, which actually ends up hyping Teach up even more, now that I think about it. But anyway, Higuma was not the only one who underestimated Shanks. We know that Kid also underestimated Shanks. He went up there, he wanted to start something with Shanks, and then he lost an arm because he didn't know what he was doing. So what I'm saying is, like, people have a tendency to underestimate Shanks, and I think that's what happened here with Who's Who. Who's Who says, I made the mistake of underestimating Shanks. And so that mistake is the thing that started this story. It's the reason Luffy has the Devil Fruit power that he has now. And so I'm wondering if Who's Who's grudge against Shanks is the reason for why he ended up joining up with Kaido in the first place. Now, we already know that the world government, for whatever reason, seems to have access to very, very rare devil fruits. We see this with the first 3 admirals having a Logia each as their power. We see it with Sengoku being a fleet admiral and having a mythical type Zoan, which is the rarest type of devil fruit power there is. We see it with Spandam when he gives Khalifa and Kaku their devil fruits, and he says that he got them because he has connections, and we know that he's pretty much a government lapdog. And then we also see it with Doflamingo being able to get the Mera Mera no Mi after Ace's death, because we knew that Doflamingo still had some degree of influence over the world government for being a previous Tenryubito. And then he also knew about the special feature of the Opi Opi no Mi, the immortality surgery. And so I'm guessing that that knowledge that Dofi had about the eternal youth surgery also came from the world government. Now, because we know that this incident happened 12 years ago, this also means that at that time, Lucci was also part of CP9. If you remember back in Enies Lobby, Doberman tells us the story of how 15 years ago back then, so it is currently 17 years ago because you have to add 2 years for the time skip. So 17 years ago there was this kingdom that was overrun by pirates, and the pirates had taken hostage some of the soldiers of the kingdom, and so the world government decided to send in Lucci, who at the time was 13. So Lucci got to the kingdom, and he pretended to get caught by the pirates so that he could be taken to where the hostages were, and so once he got to the hostages, once he saw the soldiers being held captive, he killed them all for being too weak. And then he also killed the leader of the pirates as well.
And so again, it's obvious that Rob Lucci and Who's Who met each other at some point. They were probably together in CP9 at some point. And this is something that my sister told me that she read on Facebook. So, I don't want to take credit for it, but she did tell me about this, and so I just wanted to share this. If you go to chapter 421 during the Luffy versus Lucci fight, there's this scene where the place where the two are fighting is filling up with water. And so Lucci says, I can hear the cannon fire from outside. Like, your friends must be in danger. So if you want to, you can go and help them, Go to your friends. Why are you here? You're worried about your friends, so just go to them. And then Luffy says, no, I know that my friends will survive this. I know that my friends will be fine. But if I leave this place right now, if I lose sight of you for a second, you're going to go and kill my friends. And then Lucci kind of smiles at that remark. And then he says, oh, and by the way, if you're going to read this, read it in the manga. Don't go to the anime, because the anime kind of messes up the translation a little bit. So just go to chapter 421. Lucci says to Luffy, you're worthy of being a captain. I'd like to tell a certain idiots I know about you. Now, I'm pretty sure that when I first heard that bit of dialogue back when I first saw Enies Lobby for the very first time, I probably would have assumed that Rob Lucci was referring to Spandam with that bit of dialogue, just because Spandam was such a horrible boss. So maybe he wanted to tell him about Luffy, despite Luffy being his opponent. Like, he wanted to tell Spandam, hey, this is a guy that I can kind of respect, unlike you, right? Or something like that. But now, reading it with this chapter, it just kind of opens up the door of like, wait, was he talking about Who's Who? Did Rob Lucci want to tell Who's Who about Luffy? Like, maybe telling him something like, hey, the guy that ended up eating the devil fruit that you lost for the world government? Yeah, it turns out he's actually a pretty decent captain. Just FYI.
Now, I do have a question for you guys regarding how you think these events took place, how they developed. So we know that by the time Shanks gets the Gomu Gomu no Mi, his fight with Teach has already happened, right? Because he has the scars on his face. We also know that one of Teach's goals is to collect rare devil fruits, and so we don't really know how the fight with Shanks happened, what the motivation behind the fight actually was, but we do know that Blackbeard was willing and able to kill Thatch because Thatch got his hands on the Yami Yami no Mi, which was the very rare devil fruit that Blackbeard had always wanted. Now, if you remember, back in Dressrosa, Blackbeard actually sends Burgess to participate in the tournament so that he can win the Mera Mera no Mi. Unfortunately for him, though, Sabo ends up winning the tournament, and so that power goes to him instead. And so after Sabo inherits Ace's power, we see Burgess literally change his goal from trying to get the Mera Mera to get the Gomu Gomu no Mi from Luffy. He actually tries to sneak up on Luffy and kill him. And so this chapter makes it clear that there's something special about the Gomu Gomu no Mi that we are not aware of, and we haven't been aware of. Recently, Oda has been making a very clear effort to show that Luffy is special. More than usual. Like, you got Odin talking about Joy Boy coming back to Wano to open up the borders. And then Yamato saying that Luffy is in fact the one that Odin was waiting for. And then you also have Luffy's strange ability to be able to communicate underwater and speak directly to Momonosuke. He's also able to hear Sunisha's voice as well. And then now we get the reveal that his devil fruit is special. So I've seen people asking questions like, is Luffy's devil fruit, was that also Joy Boy's devil fruit? How much of a role will predestination play in the endgame of the story, as opposed to free will and freedom, which is a huge theme of this series? These are all questions that I think, for the most part, most of us weren't really asking 2 months ago. It just makes it feel as if Oda is getting ready to reveal something big. I also think it's kind of funny how, like, Shanks, even though he stole that devil fruit from the world government, right, he gets to have secret, private audiences with the Gorosei whenever he wants. But when it comes to Who's Who, he just gets arrested.
My question to you guys is, how do you feel about Luffy's devil fruit being special? There's a part of me that just wants to jump straight into the hype and just be like, wow, this is so cool, and think about the implications. And I'm gonna do that a little bit later on in this video. But then there's another part of me, the more cynical, critical part of me, that's like, why are we barely learning about this now? Like, for example, I understand that CP9 is like a secret government organization that operates on the down low. So maybe only a select few individuals knew that the Gomu Gomu no Mi was special, okay? That being said, Luffy went to Marineford, and in Marineford there were several high-ranking Marines. And yet none of them ever said anything or made a comment about Luffy's devil fruit power being special. Luffy was hyped up in Marineford for being Ace's brother, for being Garp's grandson, for breaking out of Impel Down, for being Dragon's son, for unleashing King's Haki to save Ace. So there were some comments being made about Luffy in Marineford, sort of highlighting him as a noteworthy person. And yet nobody mentions anything about the devil fruit power that he has. Actually, I just thought about it a little bit more, and things just kind of clicked in terms of why nobody has ever mentioned this, or why nobody in the Marine side would mention this, even those who know of the existence of CP9. So here's my explanation for as to why we're barely learning about this now. So if the world government was so upset with Who's Who over losing the fruit, right, over his mistake, that they arrested him, that tells me that they probably wanted to erase that mistake from the archives, from the books, right? Similar to what they did with Sebek, where, like, they don't talk about Sebek, they erased his records because they don't want to talk about that. The only Marines that were in the know about Sebek were the Marines old enough to have lived through that era. So maybe something similar happened with this Gomu Gomu no Mi incident. Maybe the world government told the Marines in the know, hey, you shut up about this, don't ever talk about this again, you will lose your job if you talk about how we failed to protect this devil fruit. We already arrested the guy whose job was to guard it, so just shut up about this, keep quiet because it'll tarnish our reputation and people will just start questioning our image. That being said, my previous question still stands. Do you believe that the Gomu Gomu no Mi was supposed to be a special devil fruit from the beginning? Like, was this something that Oda had planned back from chapter 1? Or do you think that this was a new development, something that Oda decided to do recently so that maybe he could justify Luffy having a brand new ability, like a very unique awakening of his devil fruit? So with that in mind, I'm just going to try and connect the dots here and tell you what I think went down. Shanks obviously ended up stealing the devil fruit from that marine ship, as Who's Who says in this chapter, and we know that Shanks and Teach are around the same age, so I'm thinking that maybe Teach found out that a very special devil fruit that belonged to the government had gone missing, and maybe Teach didn't know which devil fruit it was that had gone missing, but since at the time his one goal, his only purpose in life was to get his hands on the Yami Yami no Mi, maybe he heard rumors that the fruit that was stolen was special, and so he automatically assumed that it was the Yami Yami no Mi, and so at one point Teach runs into Shanks, or maybe he runs into him almost immediately after Shanks steals the fruit. But regardless, Shanks keeps the devil fruit, or was keeping the devil fruit in his little box, in this treasure box, and Teach couldn't see what was in the box. So he ran into Shanks and he was like, Shanks, what's in the box? So Shanks has this thing about, like, not getting into fights. He says, like, if people spit on me or they pour liquor on me, like, most of the times I just brush it off. But when somebody goes against one of my friends, then, you know, that's when I get serious. And so Shanks, at that point, I think he wanted to give the devil fruit to Makino. There's a lot of theories, a lot of fan speculation about Shanks and Makino being romantic, like being a couple. Possibly Makino's baby is Shanks' son. If you go back to the flashback, Shanks leaves the devil fruit in front of where Makino is at the bar. So I think he wanted to give that devil fruit to Makino as a gift so that maybe she could sell it and pay the bills or something. You know what I mean? It's just like a gesture, like a love gift for Makino. And so Teach, when he runs into Shanks, he's like, no, Shanksu, what's in the box? You gotta let me see what's in the box. Shanks is like, no, Teach, this is a gift. It's for somebody who's very dear to me. I'm not gonna let you. And then Teach is like, no, you're gonna let me, because all my life I've dedicated to finding this one fruit. And if it's in that box, you're gonna give it to me. I mean, he even killed Patch just to get it, right? But Shanks continued to resist. Blackbeard got very upset. Shanks even tells Whitebeard during their conversation, I did not let my guard down during that fight. That guy went crazy trying to get this devil fruit that I was going to give to my girlfriend. And that's how I got the scars on my face, because that guy just wouldn't let it go. Now, you may choose to not believe anything that I just said. However, if that's the case, then I do have a question. What other possible reason could there be for Teach to wound, scar, and fight Shanks if it wasn't about him getting a devil fruit power? It just kind of makes perfect poetic sense to me that Shanks and Blackbeard were actually fighting over a devil fruit. Just some food for thought. We didn't get to see Marco or King in this, which I thought was pretty suspicious and like kind of noticeable. So hopefully we get to see them next week. We also didn't get to see Robin or her group as well, so we might get to see them next. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I thought the chapter was really good. Take care. I hope you have a great week. Comment down below with your thoughts about the points that I raised and the chapter in general. I've been very busy recently trying to complete my hours to become fully licensed as a counselor. So that's taking up most of my time. Like I literally feel like I have no days off because I'm so busy. So thanks a lot for your support. It really does mean a lot to me because I'm just so stressed most of the time. And you know, I try my best with these videos and they take a lot of time to make. So thanks again for your support. Take care. Catch you later. Bye.